The chapter is called Willigumble, Late as Usual. "We'll never let ourselves get caught by those creatures again," the Gumbles said next morning. "Never, never, never, never. We'll go away where they'll never find us," Happy Gumble said. "One more paddle first, though." Someone suddenly cried as if they were paddling. "Where's Willigumble? He's not here." They called for him, but there was no answer, and searched up and down the creek bank, but there was no sign, and after much anxious hunting, they sat down and looked at each other glumly. No one said a word, but in each Gumble head was the dreaded thought. Willigumble must have been left behind with the Bottersnakes. Little Willie, on his own, he was the smallest Gumble of them all. Happy Gumble jumped up. "We'll have to go and rescue him somehow." They started up the hill towards the rubbish heaps. Somehow they would get him back. They had not gone far before a colored thing came hurtling down the hill towards them. Faster and faster it came. Off the road it bounced, sending them scattering, and lodged against a bush. It was an asparagus tin, with something inside that looked like a lump of dough. But when they pulled it out and squeezed it into shape, it was Willigumble. He was giggling all over. "Fatso of a Bottersnake couldn't read," Willigumble gurgled. "Put me in the wrong tin." "Silly old Willie, late as usual," the Gumbles joked, but that was great relief. "The Bottersnakes did kick up a rumpus when they found you'd all gone," Willigumble told them. "They turned the rubbish heaps upside down, and all they found was the bottom of the jam tins, and then Owl told them about the tins rolling down the hill in the moonlight. Disgusting, he called it, 'cause it scared the game, and the Bottersnakes told Owl not to be an idiot. It couldn't happen, they said, and Owl told the Bottersnakes it could and did, and there was a fearful argument, and then the Bottersnakes said, 'We'll try it then, just to show what an old fool Owl is.' And they took my tin across to the road and gave it a push, and here I am." "But there are the Bottersnakes coming after us," cried Happy Gumble. "And oh, grasshoppers, look at their ears! What are you going to do? Tinkle Gumble, have a tink quickly." 2 or 3 of them squeezed Tinking Gumble till he was nearly all head, because he had his best tinks that way. And meanwhile the Bottersnakes were waddling down the hill, shouting furiously and blaming Owl for letting their last Gumble get away. Their ears were brilliant. In their horny hands they carried new jam tins. The tink came in a moment, clear as a cricket's chirrup, and the Gumbles crowded around. "What is it, Tinking Gumble? What's the tink?" "We must cross the creek," he said. "Yes, yes, but how? It's too deep," for Gumbles, though they love to splash in shallow water, cannot swim. "In Willigumble's tin, of course," he said. So they took Willigumble's asparagus tin, the only one that didn't have its bottom cut out, and using gum leaves as oars, they paddled over in loads of 4 or 5, with one oarsman bringing the tin back for the next trip. The Bottersnakes arrived at the sandy beach just as the last tinful rowed away, and there they stopped. Bottersnakes hate water. If they get wet, they shrink and have to be hung up to dry. So they stood on the bank and raged. Safe on the other side, the Gumbles pulled rude faces, cheekily waved goodbye, and scuttled into the bush. The long ears glowed red-hot with fury as the Bottersnakes howled and growled on the creek bank, until at last the king roared, "Schnunk!" and they became quieter. The king said, "We will make a Gumble trap." "A trap to catch Gumbles in. Oh, clever, clever," the Bottersnakes shouted. But what did a Gumble trap look like? The king knew, perhaps, but he wouldn't tell them. He just stood there, tickling his stomach with the end of his tail. A Bottersnake called Glop spoke up. "Suppose there was a hole in the ground and we covered it with branches so as they couldn't see it, and then when they walked over it, they'd fall in." The king thought about this for 2 minutes and said, "Just what I was going to say myself. Dig the hole." This looked too much like work, so Glop said a bit nervously, "Why don't we get Smiggles to dream one?" For very lazy people, dreaming can be a way of getting things done. And this Bottersnake named Smiggles was useful because whatever he dreamed of became real, until he went to sleep again. Then his first dream vanished to make room for his next. The trouble is that no one knew whether Smiggles would dream what he was told to dream about or something quite different. "Go to sleep, Smiggles," the king ordered, "and dream a hole, a big one." Smiggles went to sleep with no difficulty at all, and while they waited for the dream to come along, the others pottered around, looking for a bit of rubbish to make them feel at home. Presently, two of these pottering bottersnakes found an old weedy hole near the road that someone had dug ages ago. But they didn't know this. They said, "Idiot, he dreamed it in the wrong place," and went and told the king. "Move it," the king said. "Put it down by the creek." 4 bottersnakes picked the hole up by the corners and staggered with it to the creek bank, where they laid twigs and leaves over so it couldn't be seen from the top. Also, they threw a dead branch across the creek to make a bridge, and the hole was just by the end of the bridge so that as the Gumbles stepped off, they would be sure to fall in. "A very cunning gumble trap," they boasted, and then Smiggles woke up. "Not a bad hole, Smig," they told him, "except it was in the wrong place." "But I didn't dream a hole," said Smiggles, puzzled. "I dreamed a radiogram," which now stood awkwardly in the bush. An expensive model with lots of knobs and polished wood, though, under the circumstances, not much use. The king looked at Smiggles' dream work and snorted, then at the cunning gumble trap, but was not pleased with that either. "The Gumbles are too light," he growled. "They'll walk over the twigs without falling in. The idiot what thought of this gumble trap ought to have his head set on." Glub hurriedly suggested that they should all get into the hole, for they had to hide somewhere, and pull the Gumbles down as they came across. The bottersnakes liked the idea of this. They squeezed in the hole together, covered up again with leaves and twigs, snuffled their nose loudly, and had a bit of sleep while they waited. All this time the Gumbles had been playing with some frogs farther down the creek. When the sun began to get hot, they came back for another paddle at their favorite beach. All except Willigumble, who had stopped to tell some young tadpoles that they couldn't possibly play leapfrog until they had grown legs. The Gumbles were ever so cautious, and on the far bank they stopped, looked and listened, wary of the merest whiff of danger, but no bottersnakes could be seen, so they trotted over the bridge and stepped carefully over the gumble trap, which failed to catch a single Gumble. Gumbles are not so silly as to go crashing into covered holes unless they go giggly. Then they are silly enough for anything. "Funny about that hole covered with leaves. I'm sure it wasn't there before," Happy Gumble remarked, and because it is difficult not to look into a hole to see how deep it is, they moved the leaves and peeped in. It was a most extraordinary sight. Water from the creek had seeped into the hole while the bottersnakes were dozing, and the great, fat creatures who had squeezed in had shrunk to the merest of red-eared blobs, no bigger than Gumbles, in fact, and they were howling and clamoring to be let out, but naturally their voices had shrunk too. The Gumbles went quite hopeless with giggling at the sight. "Get us out of here," the bottersnakes yelled in their ridiculous voices. "Can't you see we're drowning?" Shakily the Gumbles lowered branches and helped them out. Face to face with the shrunk snakes, they burst into giggles all over again. "You don't look nearly as bad this size," they sniggered. "It's a very good size to be, don't you think?" Unfortunately, bottersnakes are objectionable, whatever their size. They were not in the least grateful. All they said was, "If it hadn't been for you Gumbles, we'd never have gotten that hole in the first place." And they found that altogether they were too small to grab the Gumbles properly. They could pick the jam tims up and throw them over the Gumbles, making prisoners of them. This they did, shouting, "Got you!" as usual, and then they sat hard on the tins and waited for the wind to dry them out so that they would grow again. That was how things were when Willigumble came along. "Oh, grasshoppers," said Willie. Now he would have to do the rescuing on his own. "I wish I could have Tinks," he said, but Tinkingumble was the only tinker. The bottersnakes thought they may as well make some noise while they were growing up, and they shouted at the radio to play a tune. No one was big enough to reach the knob to switch it on, however, and the king growled in what was supposed to be as deep as woof, but was really only a tweet. Just like that idiot Smiggles. He don't dream right, and what he do dream don't work. What gave Willigumble his big idea, though, it did not come with a tink. He nipped over the bridge and, keeping out of sight, crept to the back of the radio. A moment later, a piping, squeaky voice came out of it. "Hem! Exercises for small people to make them bigger. Are you ready, everyone?" "Just what we want," said Smiggles, very pleased with his radio and himself. The radio made them wriggle and bend, waggle their ears, and tie knots in their tails, but the bottersnakes did all their growing exercises sitting down and just would not get off the jam tins.